Welcome to the Genealogy Radio Show, the radio show keeping you in the loop. If you've been listening to the radio show recently, you'll know the past few shows we've done have given us fascinating background on some of the beautiful counties of Ireland. So far, we have covered counties such as Tipperary, Kerry, and Dublin, to name a few, and have learned just what makes them unique to each other. We have a fascinating show for our listeners today, with our guest Nicholas hoping to give us some insight into the county Waterford and its interesting history. Without further ado, I'll introduce you to our guest Nicholas. Nick, first I'd like to welcome you to our show as a guest. Can you tell me, Nick, please, a little bit about background on the county of Waterford and some of the geography and landscape of the county?
Well, County Waterford, or Fort Larga as it's known in Irish, is a county in Ireland situated in the province of Munster. It is home to two mountain ranges, the Knockmealdown Mountains and the Comera Mountains. The Knockmealdown Mountains were formerly known as Slieve Gua. The highest point on the Knockmealdown Mountains stands at 2,605 feet. These mountains lie on the border of Tipperary and Waterford, running east to west between the counties. The Knockmealdown Mountains are home to two endangered species, the red grouse and the hen harrier. The Comera Mountains are a glaciated mountain range in Waterford. They are located between Dungarvan and Clonmel of Tipperary on the border. The Comera Mountains are home to 12 different mountain ranges, which are very popular for hikers and mountain climbers. The Comera Mountains Walking Festival is held every October on the Nair Valley. The highest peak is Foscoom at 792 meters, which is 2,598 feet. Waterford is also home to many rivers, including Ireland's third longest river, the River Suir. The River Suir is a river that flows from the Atlantic Ocean through County Waterford. Together with the Nore and the Barrow, the river is one of the trio known as the Three Sisters. The Suir flows through Lochmore, Thurles, Holy Cross, Golden, and Knockgraffin, then passes through Cahir, Clonmel, and Carrick-on-Suir before reaching Waterford. In the 21st century, the remains of a very large Viking settlement were found at Woodstown in Waterford. The Office of Public Works, or OPW, recently came up with a plan to install a 1 to 200 year flood defence where the Suir flows through Waterford City. Waterford also has its own Gaeltacht region to the west of Dungarvan, where people primarily speak the language of Irish. This Gaeltacht region, called Gaeltacht na Nesha, as of the 2016 census, had a population of 1,816 people, and it encompasses an area of 62 kilometers squared. According to the census in 2016, about 45.6% of people in this region were daily Irish speakers. Waterford City is situated on the Waterford Harbour and is the oldest city in Ireland, being founded by the Vikings between the 9th and 10th centuries. Waterford County is home to 7 baronies, including examples like Coshmore and Coshbride, and there are a massive 1,629 townlands in Waterford. Examples include Clonfada and Robertstown.
Thank you, Nick. And next, can you tell me, how has the population in Waterford changed from the first attempted census and from the oldest records we have about population changes to more modern times?
The 1841 census was the first well-executed attempt at a census in Ireland. Due to complications in both 1821 and 1831, where hostility and a lack of defined borders and boundaries caused many issues in documentation. The 1841 census was also the first census to include Ordnance Survey maps. Using the website Aero, we can see that the population of Waterford in 1841 was around 194,000 people. The most highly populated areas in Waterford were Dungarvan and Waterford City. Waterford City containing the highest population in 1841 with 28,000 people. There unfortunately are no records for Waterford on the 1841 census due to many of these records being destroyed, so it is difficult to gain examples of households and people living around this time. In 1851, the population of Waterford County was 162,000, while Dungarvan and Waterford remained the most populated cities. It is also interesting to see that although the population of Waterford County dropped by nearly 30,000 people, with a percentage decrease of 16.4%, mostly due to famine, a mixture of high deaths and emigration, the population of Waterford City itself increased as it rose to 31,000 people from the previous decade. Unfortunately, due to the census information being lost, it is not possible to review and analyze data between 1851 and 1901. However, we can still gauge the population of Waterford County and Waterford City using the aero survey maps. In 1861, Waterford County's population took another massive drop to just over 133,000 people, meaning the population of Waterford had dropped about 60,000 people in 20 years. This is largely due to, as I said before, the Great Famine and the aftermath caused with high volumes of death and continuous emigration. In the year 1871, Waterford City remained the most populated city in Waterford, with a population of just under 29,000, and Dungarvan continuing to remain the second most popular, with a population of 7,000. The population of Waterford County decreased further to 123,000 in 1871, and in 1881, the population continued to drop considering mass immigration from Ireland. 112,000 people being the population, with the county continuing its trend in declining population since the early 1840s. Waterford City held its population around the same level, with a population of 28,000. And in 1891, the population of Waterford County had dropped by a further 13% to 98,000 people. Waterford City would also have its population depleted to 27,000, a 1.7% decrease from the previous decade. And in 1891, Dungarvan still remained the second most populated city in Waterford, with a population of about 6,000. The 1901 census is the first census we can properly analyse since the 1851 census. The population of Waterford, as seen on Aero, was 88,000 in 1901, which was a further 10% decrease from the previous decade. Waterford City remained around the same population level at 27,000. The population of Waterford City over the course of 50 years investigated so far, interestingly, has never gone through a massive decrease or increase in population, while the rest of Waterford County had dropped by a massive 110,000 people. 1891 to 1901 was significant, as it was the time when the population of Waterford County had officially cut its population in half, as it dropped less than 50% of what it had been in 1841. 1911 is the final year to explore in relation to census information and population graphs, with Waterford County only experiencing a smaller decrease of 4,000 people from 88,000 to 84,000. Which, although is a decrease, is lower than the decline of previous decades. Waterford City continued to face no drastic change in population following on from the previous decade, showing genuine stability in this community. No census or statistical analysis took place in 1921 due to the Irish War of Independence. Because of this, the next census was not until 1926. And from the 1926 statistics, we can see that post-war, the population of Waterford was just over 78,000 people, while Dungarvan and Waterford City again remained the two most populated areas in the county. From 1926 to 1936, there was not much in the way of a decline, with only about 1% of a decrease in the population of this county, and this was less than 1,000 people. There was another gap of 15 years following the 1936 census, thus meaning it is difficult to gauge the population again until 1951, where Waterford declined by 4,000 to a total of 74,000. At this stage, Waterford City was still home to over 29,000 people. In 1961, Waterford had a further decline of 3,000 people, while in 1971, Waterford, shockingly enough, experienced its first rise in population since 1841, 130 years ago. The population rose by 6,000 from 71 to 77,000. This rise in population would continue, where in 1981 it was recorded that the population was 90,000, a massive 13,000 from the previous decade. However, in 1991, this population would incur a slight decrease back down to 87,000. In 2002, Waterford would experience an 8% increase from the numbers 11 years ago, and this population stood at about 95,000 people. In 2016, the most recent completed census, the population of Waterford stood at about 116,176 people.
Nicholas, can you tell me a bit about some of the common surnames associated with the county of Waterford?
Whelan is a common surname in County Waterford, with the Irish being Ua Phelan, meaning small wolf or grandson. The name came from the 10th and 11th centuries ruling dynasty of the Dacia, who were a group inhabiting much of Waterford and Kilkenny during medieval times. According to history, in about 300 AD, the Dacia settled in Dungarvan, County Waterford during the Anglo-Norman period. In an extract taken from the Annals of the Four Masters, The Age of Christ, 1170, Strongbow came from England to Ireland with massive force, and along with Dermot MacMurrough, they took Wexford town and entered Waterford and took that by force too. They took Gillamere and Ua Phelan, lord of the Dacia, along with his son, and 700 other people were killed there. Some of the earliest anglicised versions of Ua Phelan are Phelan spelt with an F or Phelan spelt with a PH, while today Whelan is generally considered the most common anglicised adaptation of the name. In the 1901 census, there were 923 people with the surname Whelan in Waterford, while there was 866 people with the surname Phelan. Also, while looking at the 1911 census, there was a drop in the name Phelan, with a drop to 782, and Whelan also dropping to 856. Another common surname in Waterford is Walsh. Walsh means Briton or foreigner, and it literally translates to Welshman or Wales. This is the fourth most common surname in all of Ireland. Welshmen who were taken from Britain to Ireland after the Norman invasion of Ireland. One theory about the origin of the name Walsh is that it comes from an ancestor called Walliness, who came to Ireland on the military of Maurice Fitzgerald, Lord of Lanstephen, and it is from him who famed the Walsh of the Mountains family in County Kilkenny was established. Another theory of the Walshes is that it originated from Pembrokeshire and that they had close ties with the barons of Cornwall, or that they descended from Owen Gwyn's, Prince of North Wales. During the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, the Walsh of the Mountains family in Kilkenny took arms against Oliver Cromwell, and their stronghold in Castle Hall was taken in 1650. Survivors were executed and thrown into a burial pit at the bottom of the hill near the castle. In the 19th century, their remains were uncovered during the road building near the hill. In the 1901 census, there were 2,620 people with the surname Walsh in Waterford, with a massive over 35,000 being found all over Ireland. And in 1911, the name Walsh would become less common, however, with only 2,385 being recorded in that year. The surname Power is also another very common name in Waterford. Power comes from Norman origin and came to Ireland during the Anglo-Norman invasion of the late 12th century. The true origin of the name is unclear. However, some speculate that it comes from the French verb pauvre, meaning poor, but possibly having connotations of giving up wealth rather than actually being poor. An alternate theory of origin comes from the word pois in French. This is an old French word that we now say today as poisson, meaning fish. The surname in Ireland can be seen as either Depour or Lepour. In 1177, the Anglo-Norman king Henry II of England granted Robert Lepour the city of Waterford. Throughout all of these generations, the surname Power has remained one of the most popular names in all of Waterford. In the 1901 census, we can see that there are 4,894 people with the surname Power in Waterford, and 4,590 in the 1911 census with the same name. On the census, we can see the variant of the name Power, Depour, appear on the 1901 and 1911 census. In 1901, there are 5 people, all from the same family, who show up, while in 1911, there are 9. However, on both the 1901 and 1911 census, there are no records of anyone appearing under the name Lepore. The final common surname I'll talk about today is O'Brien. The name O'Brien is most famous as it comes from the O'Brien dynasty in Ireland. This house was founded in the 10th century by the great Brian Boru. After becoming King of Munster, he established himself as the High King of Ireland. Brian's descendants carried the name O'Brien to continue his rule over Munster. 4 O'Briens ruled Munster, with 2 being High Kings of Ireland. Throughout the O'Brien rule in Ireland, they operated through the system of tanistry, which is the process of passing down titles and land to ancestors. There are a few different spellings of the surname O'Brien. However, the two most common are spelled Obriain and Obrien. In the 1901 census, there are 1,076 people with the surname O'Brien, while in 1911 the number increased to 1,181.
Thank you for that, Nick. Now, next, can you tell me a bit about some of the historical as well as the political events that have taken place over the course of Waterford's history?
What some people may not know is that it was the Vikings who discovered and first established in Waterford. The first Viking settlements near Waterford were established in the year 853, and in the year 902, the Irish had driven all of the Vikings out of Waterford and long forts were vacated. The Vikings re-established themselves in Waterford in the year 914, led initially by Otir Jarla. However, after 917, it was led by Ragnall Uimar and the Uimar dynasty. This dynasty built up Waterford, which would officially become Ireland's very first city. One of the most prominent rulers of Waterford at the time was Ivar of Waterford. Waterford gets its name from the Norse word Vierafjord, which means windy fjord. The Irish name for Waterford is Port Larga, literally translating to Larag's Port. An interesting point to note is that the city of Waterford was given the name Waterford, and the county copied the name, as opposed to the other way around, like you might think. The Normans had been watching over Waterford for many years, waiting for the right time to strike, and the right time would eventually come. Diarmid MacMurrough, King of Leinster, attempted and failed to take control of Waterford in 1137. MacMurrough was trying to claim as much large centres as possible to improve his claim to be High King of Ireland. The introduction of Anglo-Normans to Ireland came in 1170 when MacMurrough allied himself with Richard de Clare, also known as Strongbow, and they led siege on Waterford, which resulted in them taking hold of the city. In 1171, the English King Henry II was the first English king to set foot in an Irish city, where he arrived in Waterford with a large fleet. The objective of this arrival was to ensure that Waterford became an English colony rather than a rival Norman country. Waterford and Dublin were both declared to be royal cities, and Dublin was officially named the capital of Ireland. Prince John visited Waterford in 1185 and was granted the city's first charter in 1205. This officially started city government in Waterford. In 1487, Waterford refused to acknowledge Lambert Simnel as king, and 10 years later did the same to pretender Perkin Warbeck. Due to this refusal to recognize these kings, King Henry VII gave the city the official motto, Urbs intacta mane Waterfordia, which literally translates from Latin as Waterford remains the untaken city. Waterford remained Catholic after the Protestant Reformation and continued to be independent and formed an independent Catholic government from 1642 to 1649. This government was ended by Oliver Cromwell, who put Ireland back under British rule. Cromwell's son, Henry Ireton, took Waterford in 1650. The 18th century was a period of huge prosperity in Ireland. A permanent military presence was established around this century. In the 19th century, Waterford was deemed vulnerable by the British government, so they decided to erect 3 Martello towers on the Hook Peninsula to reinforce the fort at Duncannon to ensure it remained a consistent stronghold in Ireland. Glassmaking and shipbuilding were two of the biggest industries in Waterford at this time. Waterford City was represented in Parliament in the UK from 1891 to 1918 by John Redmond MP, the leader of the Irish Parliamentary Party. In July of 1922, during the Irish Civil War, Waterford was the scene of a lot of fighting between the Irish Free State and the Irish Republican troops.
Thank you, Nicholas. Unfortunately, that's all from us at the Genealogy Radio Show today. I'm sure we can all agree what an interesting county Waterford is. As with all the previous shows, it is impossible to cover all the fascinating information on Waterford. But for now, I would like to say special thanks again to our guest Nicholas and our listeners for tuning in. This radio show, as usual, will be repeated on Sunday through Radio Cork Until then, see you next week.